Hello, everyone. Hope you're all okay. Just going to give it another minute or so for everyone to join, and then we'll get into the content.
Just while everyone's joining, Andy, I'm having problems adding the housekeeping and the handout to the invite, so might just have to get people to pop in the Q&A if they're having issues with joining, and then the handout I'll send out afterwards.
Okay, fab. Okay. I think everyone probably heard that anyway, Lucy, so that's great. Thank you. Well, on that note, let's make a start. So, hi, everyone. My name is Andy Kane. I'm part of the customer success team here at Sage People, and welcome. And we're looking forward to talking today about Sage People Flows. And before we get started, just a few housekeeping tips. As Lucy just mentioned a second ago, if you have any issues with your computer or phone audio, please just pop it in the chat or the Q&A and we'll respond to those. You can also turn on closed captions, which will be in the handout, which unfortunately don't have at the moment. So I'm not sure how to do that off the top of my head. But you can submit text throughout today's session by typing into the Q&A section, which we'll see hopefully at the top of the window. So please feel free to submit those at any point during the session. We've got a lot to cover today. So what we're looking to do is covering the content, make sure we get through that, and then we'll be having some Q&A right at the end. So I would like to introduce you to our presenters today. So firstly, Karen Gardner, who's one of the senior implementation consultants at our partner Together. Lucy Albon, who is one of our customer success managers who are leading on the main content. And then in the background, we have a few of our product experts, Andrea Myers and Aisha Ahmed, to answer your questions and support where needed. So I hope it all goes well, and over to you, Lucy.
Perfect. Thank you, Andy. So just to talk about what we're going to run through today, first of all, we're going to do a bit about getting started with flows, so what they are, talk a bit about then we're going to talk about the different elements and some best practices. We're going to run through a couple of demos of building specific flows, and then talk a bit more about advanced flow design and efficiency. This will be at quite a high level, just because when you get into advanced flows, you're getting into elements that aren't supported by Sage. And then we're going to go into some debugging and testing, and then resources available before the Q&A. But kind of before I get into the specific content, I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone who completed the form in advance of the webinar about things you'd like us to cover today. I definitely won't be able to cover everything because, we got quite a lot of responses. But kind of from that form, I gauged that kind of most people were kind of somewhat confident with flows, so had some experience building them, but not many people were super confident. And it seems like most people are using flows on a weekly or occasionally basis. So it's quite a mix today. So I'm obviously not going to be able to cater this to everyone's needs with this being quite varied, but I will try my best. And then I've done a bit of a word cloud as well to show on some of those qualitative questions that we asked, the things you were looking for, and the things that came out was the most was how to get started with flows and building them, and then the testing and troubleshooting elements as well. So I've tried to tailor it towards that, but what I'm going to do after today's session is send out a feedback form as well, so that if it hasn't hit the mark for you, I've missed something, or it's been too basic, you want something a bit more advanced, we can then take that feedback away and see what else we can do in the future. But anyway, let's get started. So, what are flows? So a flow is a method or a process to automate without the requirement for code. Flows use kind of a drag and drop interface, if you like, and it's very visual, and it supports different kinds of automation and how they're triggered. So I'll talk a bit about the specific types of automation in a moment. So the reason we're doing this flows webinar today, or one of the reasons, is that you'll probably be aware that Salesforce are migrating to flows. So what previously used to do automation, so workflows and process builders, are being retired. For a while, you've not been able to create new workflows or process builders, but they're still currently supported by Salesforce and Sage. But as of the end of the year, they will not be supported anymore. Now, I don't want anyone to panic that they won't be supported. It's not going to be like they suddenly stop working. They should still work as normal into the new year. It's just if that workflow rule or process builder breaks, then we won't be able to help you fix it. Again, still don't panic, because we have got our implementation partners with the likes of Tigella who can help you fix that and transition it to a flow if it does happen to break. The other reason as well is just kind of day to day, we get a lot of questions from our customers about how to use flows. And one of the most common use cases is being able to trigger action events, custom action events from a flow. Whilst we do have standard action events in the system, they can't be used to send emails based on custom fields, etc. So it's just giving you that bit more flexibility. So with that, I'm just going to talk you through some kind of guidelines before getting started with flows. So some things you can do with flows: you can update fields on the same object or a different object. You can send email alerts and trigger custom action events, just to name a few kind of supported use cases. However, when using flows, they always need to be used with caution. We ask that you don't use them to update key fields used by Sage people. Mainly stick to your custom fields and your text fields. And also try not to use them to replicate standard functionality. So, for example, if a standard action event exists, for example, based on employment start or start date, then you probably don't need a flow to replicate that, because that functionality is already there. So just make sure you know what exists as standard. And then the other thing I wanted to mention is that, we want to make sure that the flows you're using are supported. So today I'm going to talk you through the supported elements of flows and the supported use cases. We do have a lot of customers that use flows that are a lot more complex, and whilst that requires kind of caution, it's still possible, but it just means that our support team won't be able to help you if it breaks. Our support team also can't help you in the configuration of new flows. So if you want to build a custom action event, even though it's a supported use case, that is fine, but you would need to go to an implementation partner if you're not comfortable building that yourself in the first instance. If it was built and then it was working and then suddenly broke, then our support team could help look at it because it's a supported use case. But if you had a flow built that contained loop elements that aren't supported, and then it suddenly broke, you'd need to go back to your implementation partners for support fixing that, as that's not a supported use case. So it's just being aware of those boundaries when you're using flows to influence your decisions and how you move forwards with them. So just to get into some of the practical detail then, the supported flow types and elements are record triggered flows. These run automatically when a record is either created or updated, something changes within a record, or a record is deleted. So that's a record triggered flow. Then we've got scheduled flows. So these run automatically on a schedule that you define rather than being triggered by a specific record changing. For me, I think of them as the batch jobs you have in your installed packages. So there is an action event run batch time that you set for all your action events to send. So you might have that set to 9 a.m. in the morning, for example, and every day it looks up for those jobs to occur to trigger the emails. Scheduled trigger flows work in a very similar way. You can run them daily, weekly, or monthly, but I'd say in most instances they are run daily, like the action event batch job, to look for dates to hit, etc. And then you've got auto-launched subflows. So these are flows that have no trigger by themselves, but something else triggers them, like another flow or process. So hopefully that makes sense in our supported use types. And then you've got the actual elements that sit within inside the flow. So the supported elements from a Sage perspective are actions, and these are generally used for custom action events. And I'd say they're more flexible than email alerts, so probably used a bit more often. You've also got the assignment element. Now, these are generally used to store data within the flow for later use, but I did do a test with my colleague Matt prior to the webinar, and they can actually be used for fast field updates to update a field on the triggering record. So generally, they used to sit in the background, but in that specific use case, they can actually go and update the database. You've then got your decision element. So this is kind of your logic that sits within inside the flow, and it allows you to further condition based on your initial conditions in the flow, or get the flow to do multiple things based on different outcomes. So I've got an example of running through a decision element later on, so hopefully it'll make more sense then. You can also use flows to send email alerts. These are not as flexible as custom action events. So one of the questions I had prior to doing this webinar was that email alerts can be complicated to get the actual email to be available to use, and they're having to do a flow to go and update an email field, and it being a bit more of a complicated process. Whereas if you use a custom action event, then you can access all those roles, so the manager, the team member, the cross report managers, to trigger that email to, as you would any normal action event. So it's a bit more flexible. And then lastly, you've got the update records element. As I previously mentioned, you can update records on the triggering object or on a related object as well. So that is that. Before we get into a demo, just wanted to touch on some hints and tips for building flows. So the first one is use clear labels. So this can be from the naming convention of your flow. So I've seen many customers with a long list of flows, and the naming conventions don't actually tell you what it does. So it's hard to go and find the specific flow you're looking for. So try and make it really clear. If it's sending a custom action event, tell us that it's sending a custom action event in the title and which one. Try and add descriptions if you need to add more detail. And also within the flow, use clear labels. You've also got when you update a flow, it can version control, so make sure you're doing that, and maybe making a note of the changes that you make. Similar to the first one, make sure your API naming conventions are consistent. My next one is my favorite one, and that is word decision elements as questions. So if it's a decision, usually, if you word it as a question, it makes sense to someone who's not built their flow what it's actually doing. So if you're choosing whether to send it to a manager or not, you could use the decision element to say, is this person a manager? Yes, and then do the actions below that. And then also you get a default outcome in the flow that is just called default outcome. Someone comes and looks at that 1 year down the line, they don't really know what default outcome means unless they're very familiar with flows. So you could change that to no outcome, or if it's a yes no question, change it to a no to keep it simple. And then lastly, if you're using it for a custom action event, the system will likely be the one who's actually sending that custom action event. So when you've got your if triggered by in the action event, make sure if triggered by others is checked. Otherwise it may not send. But we will go through all of this when we go into a demonstration in a moment. So when building flows, it's always good to map out what you actually want that flow to do before you start building it, especially if you're not so familiar with flows. So I've done an example here where I've mapped out that I want when the employment object is updated and my division equals sample division. Apologies, not a very good example of a division there. And the cost code value is changed. I want to send a custom action event to HR. So that is what I've mapped out, and now I'm going to go in and build that. So let's move on to the first demo.
Now I'm going to talk you through how to use flows to create this custom action event that I've left in my right-hand pane just for reference. So first of all, I'm going to navigate into Setup. Then in the quick find on the left, I'm going to search for flows. I'm now going to do a new flow. As I've already established, I want this flow to trigger when a cost code value is changed and when a division equals sample division. As a result, I want this to be a record triggered flow because it's going to happen when a record is updated. So let's click into that. When you first open flows, the first thing you need to do is define the object in which the flow is based on. For me, I want the flow to trigger when the cost code value is changed to true. So just to show you where this sits, if I navigate to one of my team members, and then I'm going to click into the employment record for Steve Pendleton. As you can see, the cost code value sits here on his employment record. As a result, the object I need to use here is the employment object. If you start typing, it will come up. Now I've selected the employment object. The next thing I do is select when the flow is triggered. Here I have 4 options. So I can either say when the employment record is created, I want to trigger this flow. Now, generally, that's not too much use in kind of day-to-day stuff and HR automations for existing processes, as you'll probably have a lot of automations already set up for when that employment record is already created, but it still might be of use. Then I've got when a record is updated. For the cost code value to be changed, the employment record will need to be updated. The next option is I want this to trigger either when the record is created or updated. So if I had a new employment record created and the cost code value is changed, I want to trigger an email, or if it's that and an existing employee's record is edited, then I want to trigger that. I'm not going to do this option because it's quite likely that everyone's going to have a cost code value entered when their record is created, and I might get inundated for emails. So for this demonstration, I'm going to use a record is updated. The last one is a record is deleted. We recommend you stay away from this as it's quite risky when we get into deleting records and it can be hard to get them back. So I would leave that one. The next thing you come to when you set your flow is to set the entry conditions. So kind of when do I want this to trigger? So I might have standard conditions in most of my flows to say kind of I want to filter out leavers, although in this case, am I realistically going to be updating an employment record of a leaver on something like this? Probably not, so I'm not going to filter them out on this occasion, but it's something you'll need to think through when building your flows. However, I have got my conditions as defined on the right hand side. So I'm going to set this to when all conditions are met. This works similar to the filter logic you can use within reports. So in some previous webinars, I know I've talked through point in time reporting when you can kind of look at headcount as of a set date, and you use these OR logics to say, start date was on or after this date, end date was kind of on or before this date, to kind of get them in a specific date range. So, if you've got two conditions and you might say their division is A or B, you might use this one. But for my simple demonstration, I'm going to use all conditions are met. So in here, I can search for any field. So my first one I've got is division. I can scroll down the list and look for it, or I can just start typing. And I've got division name just here. Now, on my org, I've got two divisions. I've got one on the team member and one on the employment record. The entry conditions will only show fields on the triggering object. So I'm using the division of the employment object. That's the one available to me. If I wanted to find the team member one, I can't actually do that because it doesn't show any related records. I would need to do that in a decision element later. But for now, let's just select division. So I want my division to equal sample division. This is the pick list value that's appeared in my resource list. I only have one in my trial org, but your org will be a lot more up to date. Then my next condition I want to be is cost code value. And again, I'm just going to type and I can see it here. I don't want to say I want this trigger when cost code value equals a specific value. Again, I've only got sample cost code value in my org. I actually want to say I only want this to send when the cost code value is changed. So therefore, I select my operator is changed. And then I want my value to be true. So cost code value is changed. True means yes. So as it stands, if the division equals sample division and the cost code value is changed, when an employment record is updated, my flow is going to trigger. If I only triggered this when a record was updated and I didn't add any conditions here, then any time any edit to the employment record is made, this flow would trigger. For example, I could go and edit the manager. If there's no conditions, this flow will trigger. I could also go and update the function. If there's no conditions, this will always trigger. So you've really got to think about when do I want this to send and make sure it's not sending in kind of all different scenarios. That's why we test all of our flows. The next thing you've got here is when to run the flow for updated records, and I find this often causes confusion. So in short, what this means is, so this first option selected, every time a record is updated and meets the condition requirements. So the conditions we've just defined here about the division and the cost code value, as long as those are met, this flow will trigger, even if they've been met before. So if you deleted that last one, cost code value is changed as true and just left the division equals sample division. If Steve Pendleton's record was updated, his let's think of a field, his function was updated on the employment record, then if this division is sample division, this will trigger every time that is edited. The second option, only run a record when a record is updated to meet the condition requirements, means that if I deleted that last condition out on the cost code value and left it as division, if I selected that second option, it would only trigger when the division name is changed to sample division. So there's a bit of a difference there. If you've used the is changed operator like I have on the cost code value, you can only use that top option because it wouldn't work. And you can see that in the message here. I can't actually select that second option. If I deleted that, then it would be available to me. So I hope that makes sense. So the last section that we come to is what we want to optimize the flow for. And we've got two options: fast-filled updates and actions and related records. In short, a fast-filled update is used when you want the flow to run before the record is actually saved. It's efficient and it's quick. However, actions and related records run after the record is saved and would always be used with email alerts, because you generally want email alerts to trigger once a record has updated. So for example, in this, my email template that I want to trigger merges in the new cost code value and what it's changed to. Last option we have down the bottom here is about adding an asynchronous path. An asynchronous path is a branch in your flow that runs after the main record update is saved. Think of it as a background task that doesn't slow down the main update. But why would you use it? Some actions, like sending emails or updating related records, don't need to finish before the record is saved. Running them asynchronously keeps the main update fast and avoids record lock errors when multiple updates happen at once. It also improves reliability. As an example, when a team member is terminated, you may want the main path to immediately update fields like status equals terminated and save the record. But then you may want the async path to send the exit email after the record is saved. This way, the email doesn't delay the save or cause locking issues. Think of it like main path is save the record now. Asynchronous path is do extra tasks later in the background. However, we don't need to use it in this simple flow scenario. So now if I just press X, click back into the flow at any time and see the options I've selected earlier. Next thing I want to do is add an element. And this is a really, really simple flow. I just want to send a custom action event. I've checked off the object I'm triggering off the flow. I've checked off my entry conditions. They could all be dealt with in the entry requirements. So now I just need to trigger my custom action event. So to do this, I select action on the left-hand side. And then in the search bar here, I just search for custom action event and it appears just here. Now, before I enter these details, I just want to show you my custom action event. First, I'm navigating to my relevant action event pattern called Alert Emails. And then I will click into the one I created earlier and click Edit to show you how it's set up. So to create a custom action event, you should always select Custom as the event on this drop-down list. Then a second pick list appears and you need to ensure the question mark is selected. Finally, you need to enter a name for the custom action event. This cannot have any spaces in it. I always use capital letters to differentiate between the words. Try and make it as descriptive as possible. I would also recommend adding a description to say what this is doing. You then need to select your email template as per usual. I've selected one called Cost Center Change Division X. You also need to ensure that if triggered by others is checked when triggering custom action events. Otherwise, it may not send. I'd always avoid adding conditions to custom action events on the action event page because all the condition requirements can be dealt with within the flow itself. You then need to select who it's going to. For the purposes of testing, I always like to use my email in the Send to Email Addresses box. That happens in my first stage of testing. If I actually want this to go to, say, a manager, a team member, or a cross-report manager, I would test that that's working in the second phase after I know it's sending to my hard-coded email address here. If I click save on the action event, you can see the event name comes up as custom and then what I typed in. For the flow, I need this part of the event name. Do not include the prefix of custom. If I then jump back into my flow, I give this action a label. Now, we always recommend keeping your naming consistent, and however you like to do this is totally up to you. But for me, I like to say what action event I'm sending. So send AE0043, which is the number given here. I might include the name here as well if I like. And we always recommend adding a description. I'm not going to just for this demonstration's purposes. Then you need to set the input values. The event name is simply the name I added to my custom action event. So this part here goes straight into the event name. Always copy and paste to make sure you're not making any typos. The next part is the object ID. Now, this is the part where a lot of errors can happen, but it is really simple. So what you need to do when entering the object ID is looking at the object that triggers the flow, i.e. for this it's the employment record, and select the record ID for that object. If this object here triggering the flow was a team member record, I'd need to find the object ID of the team member record. It always needs to be the ID of the triggering object. So if I click into this box, you can see I've got quick resources and I've got triggering employment. So I need that one. I need fields on the triggering object, which is employment. If I click into there, and then you can scroll down, but I always like to start typing. I don't click anywhere, leave my cursor where it is flashing down here, and then I just type record ID. And then it's come up just here under record fields, and it's just the one record ID, not employment record hashtag. So if I select record ID just here, that's all I need to do. Now, the next box, I need the record ID, but of the team member record, not the employment record. No matter what flow you do, what custom action event you do, this last box will always be the team member ID. Just how you need to get to it may vary. And here it's really important that you understand the object structure of Sage People. So let me just click in here and show you what I mean. So again, I've got the quick resources triggering employment object. I can't click straight into the team member object because this whole flow is built on the employment object. So all I need to do is click into that. Then you'll see I have a subheader for relationship fields, and this means I can access different objects that are related to the employment object. If you scroll down, you'll see I've got the team member object just here with a chevron. If I just click onto that, and now that I'm in the team member object, again, I leave my cursor where it is, and I just type record ID. And here it is down the bottom. Click on that, and you can see the path goes from employment to team member to record ID on the bottom one, and then on the object ID you've just got employment record ID. If the object ID here was team member, these would both look the same. So that is all I need to do. Let's just save that flow. And let's give it a really obvious naming convention. I like to say it's a custom action event. Something like this, but again, your naming conventions are entirely up to you. Just name it something really clear and give it a description if you can. Now I've saved that, the next thing I can do is run it through a debug. If I click on this button here, I can then get this to trigger for a specific record. Steve Pendleton's employment record has come up for me, so I'm going to use that one. And then if I expand this, update record, I can test updating a specific field. So if I update cost code value to none, i.e. changing it from something to nothing, cost code value is changed is true. And then I click run. You can see the flow is triggered as if the employment record was updated. And I can also see the 18-character Salesforce ID of the employment record it referred to. You can see the record met the start conditions and the action event was run. And I can see the team member record ID linked here. So that all looks like it's working fine. So that's always worth a test. I'm going to activate that now. Now that that is activated, I'm actually going to go and make an amendment in Steve Pendleton's record. So here we go. If we go into cost code value, let's change that from sample cost code value to none. And notice his division name is sample division, so that's fine. If I just wait a minute now to see if I get an email. As you can see, I've now received an email to let me know that Steve Pendleton's cost center has changed to blank. So that has all triggered fine. The last thing I'd do would be to change the custom action event so that it's going to the relevant recipient. So whether that is the manager, team member, etc., I would select those values and run another test using that manager in Sandbox. But that flow is set up and looks like it's working okay. The other thing I would test is just running that flow by changing the division to nothing. And then I would change the cost code value and then see if that sends, just to make sure that it's respecting kind of both conditions. So I should not receive an email now I've changed that. And that is how to create a custom action event using a record triggered flow.
So just to correct myself on that as well, at the beginning when I said about triggering the flow if a record is deleted, you could actually use that to trigger a custom action event. So for example, if a team member record gets deleted, you might want an action event email to go to HR to let them know. It's just actually using flows to delete records that we would try and avoid.
Lucy, sorry to interject. Your audio's gone quite low.
Apologies. Can you hear me better now?
Much better, thank you.
Apologies. Do I need to repeat that?
Maybe if you don't mind, thank you.
Yeah, of course. Sorry. So yeah, it was just saying that just to correct myself, at the beginning I said about we don't recommend doing a flow if a record triggered if a record is deleted. You can do that for custom action events. So if you want to say if a team member record gets deleted, please notify HR, then that is fine. That is a supported use case. It's just the actual deletion of records that we don't support. Just moving on, I'm very conscious of time, apologies. Just really quickly going to talk you through a schedule triggered flow as well with an error in it as well to see how that actually looks.
Now I'm going to talk you through how to create a schedule triggered flow. I like to think of schedule triggered flows similarly to the batch jobs in the installed packages. So for example, the action event batch send time. That action event batch send time looks up every day for jobs to run. So for example, if you've got an action event triggered to go 7 days before the employment start date, that's looking up every day for those -7 days to hit, and then it's going to go and send that email. Schedule triggered flow can do the same thing, but with some of your custom fields if you need to set those triggers. So first of all, let's go and create a new flow. And let's select the flow type as schedule triggered flow. And then first of all, you've got to set your schedule. And this is very similar to the schedule that you'd set in your installed packages for your action event batch send time. So I always start it as today's date because I'm going to be testing it today. And then you set the time you want these emails to trigger on a daily basis. So for now, I'm going to select 10 a.m. But when I come to testing the flow, I'll set the time to a couple of minutes from the current time so that I can get testing it straight away and I don't need to wait for 10 a.m. to hit. And then frequency, I always set this to daily because generally I'm using this to look up for when a certain day hits. If I only do it, say, weekly, then it might miss that specific day I'm looking for. So that's generally how you start all scheduled triggered flows. Then if I click on the left to choose my object, I can say what I want to trigger this from. Again, I'm going to trigger this flow based off the employment record. And I've got my use case here on the right hand side. I want to filter out my levers, but I'm going to do that in my decision element because I want to use the has left field, which exists on the team member record, not on the employment record. And my entry conditions can only look at the triggering object. But let's do my next one. So I only want to do this for a certain work location. And then I'm going to search for London, because that is Steve Pendleton's work location. Now this time I am going to add a decision element. So if I click on the plus here on the left and then select my decision logic, this allows me to be a bit more flexible with my filters, and then I can go from there. So my first one is I want to get rid of levers. So has the employee left? And, you know, decisions should always be worded as questions because you set outcomes. So it makes most sense to someone looking at this later down the line if it's worded as a question. My first outcome will be no, they have not left. And then I can search for a resource. So kind of similar to when I did the record triggered flow, I can select the triggering object to access fields. And then from there, I can navigate to other relationship fields, such as the team member object, to get fields that exist there. So now if I start to type has, then I've got has left as an option. So if they've not left, has left equals false. And I can add extra conditions here if I want. I'm not going to at this stage. You also get a default outcome. So, you know, generally we change this to no outcome, but kind of given this as a question and my no outcome is, has the employee left? Yes, that's when I want no outcome. So I'm just relabeling that to yes. And then under the yes, I'm just going to make sure I end that element so that I've got my two very clear, distinct, separate branches. Now, under the no, has the employee left? No, then I actually want to trigger my email. However, I've also got kind of two requirements here. I want to send an email 7 days before the certificate expires and also 1 day before the certificate expires. So what I'm actually going to do is add another decision element under has the employee left. Select my decision element again and then have another question to say how many days until the mental health first aider certificate expires. And then I'm going to add my outcome label as -7, which is 7 days before. And then with my resource, what I want to do here is I've actually already created a custom field. So if I just go to Steve Pendleton's record, he's got mental health first aid certificate expiry date. Then he's also got how many days until that date. Now, if I just jump in and show you, it's a very simple formula on the employment object. the formula field, return type number. If I just click edit so you can see it better, you can see my formula is literally today, open bracket, close bracket, minus, and then I've inserted the API name for the mental health first aider certificate expiry date. So that exists in my system as it is there. So now if I just jump back to my flow, then I can search for that field. First, I need to click into the triggering object, and this is the object the field sits on, the employment object. And then I can see I've got my days until, and the hashtag symbolizes that it's a number field. The calendar symbolizes it's a date field. And then I'm going to type -7. And then I'm going to add another outcome just here, and I'm going to call this -1. And again, I do the exact same thing, select my triggering object, and then I'm searching for my field, days until certificate expiry, and then I'm putting my value as -1. And then I'm going to change this other outcome to no outcome. I just close that side pane for a second. You can see now, I first of all got the branch, has the employee left? If yes, no action is required. No, how many days until the sick note expiry, and then what it's going to do. And then under here, I can simply add my action element and then search for my custom action event element. And then if I just jump to the one I made earlier, you can see I've got action event 44, and it's called MHFA certificate expiry. So I'm going to label this send action event 44 and pop the name in there, keeping it consistent with my other flow. Event name is always the name of your custom action event, remembering to remove the custom prefix. And then again, my object ID is the ID of the triggering object. I cannot find it, so I'm just going to type record in front. There we go, it's there, record ID. Again, my next job is to select the team member ID. So again, we click into the triggering employment object, search for the team member relationship field, and then again, I can type record ID and click into it as it pops up. I just click out of that. That is almost done. And then I just need to click into my -1 day. I might have a separate email template for this saying something slightly different, but just for the purposes of this demonstration, my email is exactly the same. So again, I select my custom action event. It doesn't like having the same action name twice. So I'm going to call that number 2. Give the event name. Select my record ID. Team member, and again, record ID. And I'm just going to click save to just save that flow. And there is my full flow. So I've got 2 decision elements. Has the employee left? No. If so, how many days until the sick note expiry? And I've got my 2 custom action events, which I've used the same template for. And then I'm just going to activate that flow. I'm now just going to get that flow to run and send this action event. It's going to my email address hard-coded, and then I'm just going to update Steve Pendleton's mental health first aid certificate expiry date. So it's 7 days away. So I can use this field as a sense check to see I've got the right date as well. So let's just see if that sends now the flow is activated. Now, this is a good example of an error. So I've received an email to say that the flow has failed to send because the work location London is invalid. Now, because work location is a lookup field, I actually need the Salesforce ID of that work location record rather than the name. So just to show you how to get that, if I jump back into my org, and then I'm just going to go onto the work location related list. If I click into London, I can actually get that record ID for London here. It's always in the URL. So if I just copy that now and jump back into my flow. Now what I want to do is click where it says my condition about the work location, which is on the initial condition, and then just paste over where it says London to the record ID. And then I'm going to save that as a new version. And then I'm going to reactivate that. Now that is reactivated, I've just got to wait for the email to come through. Now that I have fixed the record ID for the work location, I've received this email to notify me that Steve Pendleton's mental health first aid certificate is approaching its expiry date, and with a note of the expiry date there.
So I'm very conscious of time. Apologies, I've not time managed this very well. I've got a few slides that I'm going to skip through because they're just kind of things I've already been over, just to reiterate the message for information purposes. Common use cases I'm going to skip as well because we can share the slides afterwards and you can have a little look at those. I'm also going to skip, we've got a couple of slides on hints and tips. Again, they're things that we can publish with the slides afterwards. A thing I wanted to touch on very briefly is just formula fields. So when I talked about the record triggered flow and my entry conditions only being able to be on the object that's triggering the flow, so for example the employment record, you can actually use a formula field such as the one here to do your entry requirements in the first place based on differing objects as well. So that's definitely worth a look. I will publish this as well afterwards. Again, I'm going to skip this one just because of time, but I will try and write something up on this so I can share it after the call as well. But what I really wanted to get onto was to hand over to Karen, just to talk a little bit about a couple of the questions we had come in advance of the webinar, and just to talk to how you would handle these scenarios, Karen. So over to you if that's okay.
Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, so the couple of questions that have come in relation, I will caveat this by saying it's hard to give an exact answer without physically seeing the configuration, but places to look and things to do. So you've got your paused and failed flow interviews within setup. They kind of act like Apex jobs for flows to be able to tell you why something's failing. It could be that you've got too many things trying to happen all at once, and you need to give the system and the flow a little bit of a break. Lucy's given some very cool graphics for an analogy I tried to use, which is, are you trying to funnel everything down a single road without sounding tacky? Turn it into a motorway, give it some options to help it slow down a bit and think. It could be that you may look at asynchronous scheduling of the flow to be able to, like Lucy talked about earlier, to be able to give it the update that it needs to do and then deal with the flow information. criteria. Are there any decisions within the flows that are happening? Again, this is all thinking about slowing it down and only getting it to act on the information that, or the records that you want it to act with. And then other things like so I've said criteria, is the same thing triggering multiple flows? If that's the case, could they be combined? But also, what are those decisions within them? Are they too vague? Are you trying to funnel too many things down the same route? We could, and I do go down rabbit holes, and we could spend a lot of time talking about the same subject, but as Lucy's already alluded to, we are quite tight on time. But I would start by looking at the flow and thinking about it on a smaller basis, or having other things within it to help mitigate those errors.
Perfect. Thank you, Karen. Apologies, I didn't leave you much time there.
It's fine.
Will definitely time manage better next time. But that's super helpful, and I think, kind of like you say, it's a very much it depends scenario. So it's hard to pinpoint some of the questions we've had coming in, but hopefully it gives you a bit of a flavour for how you can start to handle these things. Just very, very quickly before I just touch on the resources available, we've got some troubleshooting tips here. Again, they're the sort of thing you can read through. So what I'm going to do is publish these at the end so you can have a look at these. If any of them don't make sense, then you can come back to me and we can clarify those for you. This is the handout I'm going to share after the webinar of some actual hyperlinks to specific training. But what I really wanted to do today was give Karen the opportunity to talk again a bit about how they can support you as well, because I think I talked at the beginning that we're quite restricted on our supported use cases in Sage People, but obviously there's a lot of great things you can do with flows outside of those use cases. So it's just knowing we have got partners that can support when you want to go a bit above and beyond. So Karen, are you all right to touch on kind of how you can help, please?
Absolutely. Thanks, Lucy. Yeah, so absolutely. So like Lucy mentioned earlier on in the presentation, the obvious scenario with this is the migration from workflows and process builders to flows. That's a project that we can help with. Not only, we don't just lift and shift either, we analyze them, we look at them, we improve them. Have you got multiple things that can be combined, things like that? We can look at them. If you're already using flows, is there anything that can be done to improve those for you? Custom configuration, not only in terms of simpler things, but packages of custom configuration as well in terms of flows. And then we have managed services and things like that as well, specifically in relation to flows.
Thank you, Karen. And I'm just gonna pop up your next slide as well, which has got your contact details as well, so that if kind of anyone would like to reach out to Gela for support on the flows, then obviously there's a contact email there. But anything else you want to add, Karen? Apologies, I'm really sorry for not leaving you much time.
Honestly, it's fine. No, just that, you know, as an implementation partner of Sage's, we do everything from implementations from scratch to additional services, managed services, payroll, health checks, additional training. I think there's about 6 of us that are trained to deliver Sage training. We also do bespoke training related to your specific system. Yeah, anything and everything really that we can tailor that to clients' individual needs.
100%. I know I've had a customer before where their systems admins built a load of flows and then left, so that they've had partner support just to understand the flows that are there and if they need to, how they need to maintain them moving forward. So there's definitely kind of lots you can help with. I think it's pretty much an open book, isn't it?
Absolutely, for sure.
Perfect, thank you. Well, we're not going to have time for a Q&A. I've got a couple of predefined questions that I was going to answer, but I'll publish those at the end if that's okay, along with the ones we've had in the chat, because I don't want to keep anyone any longer. But just to say thank you everyone so much for joining today, but also those of you who completed the form in advance of the webinar to help shape the session. I'm so sorry about the timing of it and not being able to cover everything. Flows is such a big topic, so to explain each element and things is quite time consuming, but I'll send out a feedback form, and if you need anything else, we can follow up in the new year as well.
And just to mention as well, Lucy, for anyone who has asked a question within the Q&A, whilst we can't read them back, we have answered those. So just make sure you check the Q&A before you check out.
But we'll publish them as well at the end as well. So even if you miss it, we'll make sure they're published with the webinar for you. Perfect. Well, thank you, everyone. Have a lovely Christmas and a happy new year. Hopefully not long till you all break up, and we'll see you in 2026.
Thanks, Lucy.
Thanks
Thanks, everyone.
everyone.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.